Hi, my name is Nathaniel Fawson. I'm an archaeologist and person who has animal skulls in his room, and this channel is dedicated to the archaeology of North America, in particular the period prior to colonization by Europe. So, longtime viewers of the channel will be aware that me and the channel Ancient Americas recently collaborated on a video about the Solutrean hypothesis, and in the production of that, the YouTube algorithm decided that I needed to see that Scott Wolter had done an America Unearthed episode about the Windover site in Florida. And people who have seen previous discussions of Scott Wolter's show will know that I absolutely despise everything that comes out of this man's mouth. There are really two options with him. One, he's either a complete fucking idiot, which I don't think is the case, or two, he knows he's full of shit, but he's still willing to profit off of spreading misinformation anyway, which in my opinion just makes him a terrible person. So, no illusions here. I'm not going to like pretty much any conclusion that this man makes. So, I guess since it's my day off, I am going to rage, drink, and bitch about all of the bullshit that comes out of Scott Wolter's mouth in this episode. Slanchavar. Let's get into it. I misplaced my small headphones, so I have to wear these monstrosities.
The history that we were all taught growing up is wrong. My name is Scott Wolter, and I'm a forensic geologist. There's a hidden history in this country that nobody knows about. There are pyramids here, chambers, tombs, inscriptions. They're all over this country. We're going to investigate these artifacts and sites, and we're going to get to the truth. Sometimes history isn't what we've been told.
Yes, the history that we've been taught is wrong. We have learned quite a bit, even in the last 20 years, about the, pre-colonial past of this continent. But what Scott Wolter really wants his audience to believe is that people from Europe and the Near East, Phoenicians and so on and so forth, are more important than you've been taught. When the reality is, in terms of the global historical narrative, they're significantly less significant than most of us raised in an American education system have been led to believe. Europe and the Near East are not the main characters of history. Also, I've talked about this before, but his whole "I'm a forensic geologist" shtick is completely bogus in this context. He was a concrete analyst for the 9/11 investigation, the World Trade Center, back in 2000, after 2001. And now he's mostly just full of shit for a living. His experience is completely irrelevant to archaeology.
I often find myself investigating evidence of voyages to the United States by brave pre-Columbian explorers who came here before 1492. I think the Templars, the Celts, and the Vikings all fall into this group. But remains unearthed in a Florida peat bog back in 1982 could be those of some of the very first people to come to what's now North America. People who arrived more than 8,000 years ago. It's a controversial theory with huge implications.
It's not a theory, it's a hypothesis.
A local woman who contacted me believes when the truth comes out about where these people came from, it could change what we know about the early human history of America. I want to learn more about the bones of the prehistoric people who once lived here. Their bones were immaculately preserved, which should help me figure out both who they were and where they came from. So Candida, I'm really glad that you contacted me. Your email was very interesting, to say the least. These bog people, they're fascinating. How did you first find out about the bog people?
I came across the bog people on a documentary a few years back, and I've been studying everything I could on the subject since I found out about them.
This was discovered in, what, 1982?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. There was a construction company developing a new subdivision.
Okay.
During the construction, they found these skulls, and they called in the police.
Okay, I want to, I think I know where they're gonna head, and I also want to, like, cut off an argument that I've already seen in my comments section before about the Windover site. The coroner who first looked at these skulls thought that they looked more European than Native American. And in the early 20th century, it was believed that you could tell someone's racial identity based on various metrics of the skull. Certain anthropologists even said this about the Ancient One, who you might know better as Kennewick Man from, I believe it was Washington State. But Eske Willerslev, who's a Danish geneticist, has done genetic analysis of the Ancient One and found that even though this individual supposedly looked more European than Native American genetically, he was completely Native American. He was ancestral to modern indigenous people in North America. All that to say, these kinds of craniometric proxies for ancestry, when we're talking about people, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, it's a completely bogus pseudoscientific methodology. You have to use the genetic evidence, not these cranial morphometrics.
Because they thought that there had been a murder.
Really?
Yes.
How many bodies did they find?
They found about 100 bodies perfectly intact, brain matter and everything. They even found the contents of food they had eaten in their stomachs.
But why did you bring me out here?
Well, I brought you out here because I can't actually take you to the site itself,
Okay.
but I wanted you to see the environment that they were buried in.
Okay, just get a sense of what the site is like.
Right.
Okay. And actually, as I look out over the bog here, the preservation conditions had to be perfect for brain matter to be preserved. There's two things that you need that we do have here. One is you have to have a neutral pH. If it was more acidic here in the bog conditions, that would promote decomposition. The other thing is there's very little, if any, oxygen in the water. So what we call anoxic conditions, which also does not promote decomposition. So the two things that you need, you have here.
That is all fundamentally correct.
What's important about these prehistoric bodies is what they tell us about America's earliest inhabitants. Archaeologists say the first migration took place around 13,000 BC.
Okay, I've harped on this plenty, and I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, but archaeologists have had ample evidence that people were here before 13,000 BC since the 90s. This is a straw man argument that for some reason news media, documentaries, so they love to throw up this 13,000 BC date that we've known has been bogus for a long time.
In school, we're taught that the first people to America migrated from Asia across the Bering Strait using a land bridge that's today submerged underwater. This theory is called the Clovis theory.
It's actually called the Clovis first hypothesis. It is not and has never been a theory.
Because Clovis, New Mexico is where the first tools attributed to these people were found. Some experts believe the Clovis people were the ancestors of today's Native Americans. To date, there have been at least 7 further sites thought to be connected to the Clovis people.
At least 7 sites is kind of a hilarious number because it's an understatement. Here's a map of some particularly important pre-Clovis sites. I'll just leave that up for a second. Also, every ancient DNA source that we have ever had analyzed from kind of this time period in North America, be it the Anzac Child in Montana, Paisley Caves, I believe that one's in Oregon, the ancient one, Kennewick Man from Washington, and also, yes, the human remains at the Windover site here, all have been Native American, not from, certainly not from Europe, like they're trying to propose here.
So, could the bodies discovered here be Clovis settlers who made it all the way to Florida?
No, the people at Windover were not Clovis settlers because the people at Windover were early archaic. Clovis had not existed for thousands of years at that point. Clovis is a tool tradition. It's not it's not an ethnic group. It's a way of making spear points. That's all Clovis is. I've got a whole video about that also.
Or did the mysterious people buried here come from somewhere else? What else can you tell me about these bog people?
Well, there's some controversy around them. The accepted theory on them is they were Clovis people.
Back when I went to school, I was taught that people that originated from Asia migrated over the Bering Strait land bridge into what is now North America. These people were considered what they call Clovis.
It's almost like the 1970s were a long-ass time ago, dude. We've learned things since then.
This would be the time period towards the end of the Great Ice Age. This was the time of the great mammals like giant sloths, cave bears, saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, and many people believe that the Clovis people hunted them. So that's possible that they could have come via that route.
Because they did.
I'm not really buying into that.
You're not?
No.
What do you think is the truth?
I believe they could be European. Is that
Cool.
nuts?
European?
Yes.
No, I don't think that's nuts at all. In fact, many scholars today are beginning to question whether or not the Clovis people were the first people to come to North America.
Okay, so this is characteristically disingenuous. Yeah, archaeologists for the last 3 decades have developed a pretty robust body of data and analyses that demonstrates that people came to North America before the Clovis people existed. Before the Clovis technology was invented, really, is how I should phrase that. But that body of work still points to Siberia as the Urheimat, the point of origin or the region of origin for indigenous North Americans, not Europe.
If these bog people came from Europe, like Candida believes, it doesn't make sense to me that they'd have come from the West. A journey from Europe to Florida across the Bering Strait land bridge would be an almost 15,000-mile trip, which seems crazy.
Because
But
it is.
as a geologist, I also know that a sheet of ice may have extended from Europe to North America, and that distance would only be around 5,000 miles, making it a much more reasonable route to take. If a prehistoric link to Europe could be proven, it'd be a huge deal. You know, you sent me a photograph that I wanted to look at. So this is the skull from one of the bog people, right?
Yes.
Was there any DNA testing that was done?
There was DNA testing done, and it has been published. However, I heard it was European.
Except it has been published back in, I think it was, hang on one second. Yeah, it has been published back in the late 90s here. They're Native American.
Do you realize how important this would be if even one of these bodies came back with European DNA?
But more importantly, the people that today we consider to be genetically European didn't exist yet 9,000 years ago. I talked about this in the Solutrean video also, but the modern European genetic makeup, people who are, we would consider genetically European, that is a combination of early European hunter-gatherers, the first farmers coming out of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and then a later wave of Bronze Age pastoralists. We call them the Yamnaya archaeologically, from the Eurasian steppe. And that combination wasn't in place until after about 5,000 years ago. At the earliest, so 9,000 years ago, we would be talking about, European hunter-gatherers, maybe with a little bit of like the very earliest farmers coming out of Anatolia. These people are not European in any way that we would recognize in 2024.
This would be explosive and would rewrite a huge chapter of American history. This is something we have to get to the bottom of. When it comes to the history of North America, most of us have been taught the only people who lived here in prehistoric times came across a land bridge that stretched from Asia to Alaska during the last ice age. While no one challenges that migration story, some experts are starting to question whether the people who traveled to America along that route were really the first. In Florida, I'm discovering new evidence that could force a rewrite of our past. A staggering amount of skeletal remains, bones from 168 people, were buried in a bog here, and a local woman told me something shocking. She thinks there's reason to believe these skeletons are European. Because she was denied access to the site where the bones were found, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm about to. I'm meeting a bioarchaeologist who has special access to the Windover bog. Because she's someone who studies bones found at archaeological sites, I'm hoping she can tell me about this place and the prehistoric people who lived here. So Rachel, tell me, what is so significant about this site?
I'm looking forward to seeing how they cut around her to make it look like she's saying shit she definitely didn't say.
Well, the site is significant for several factors. One, it's very ancient. It dates to over 7,000 years old, so that makes it significant because a lot of those ancient sites don't last in the archaeological record.
So the haplogroup she's talking about, I believe Pete talked about it in our video about Solutrean. I don't think it was me. She's talking about the X haplogroup. And basically what you've got is you've got X, and then X diverges into X1 and X2. Forget about X1 for now. It doesn't really come into this. X2, in America, we have X2A clade and X2G clade. In Europe, we have X2B, C, and D. X2A and X2G are not descended from B, C, and D. They're all descended from some ancestral X2 that branched off into these different subgroups or subclades 20,000-ish years ago. This has nothing to do with people from Europe coming to the Americas and creating this X2A and X2G clade. They're more like cousins, rather than having like a parent-child relationship. Hopefully that clears that up.
So you're saying there was nothing found here that indicates a European origin at all, is that correct?
The skeletons, the DNA, the artifacts are typical of what we find here in North America for that time period. We're still trying to tease out when people arrived in the Americas, how they got here, whether they walked via land bridges or skirted the coast using watercraft. And then there are some that believe they didn't come from Asia at all, that there were some migrants coming over from across the Atlantic. And it's very controversial.
It is controversial.
But I know that someone at the Smithsonian is examining a possible connection between European culture and ancient Native Americans.
Really?
Yes.
So there's somebody at the Smithsonian who is investigating the possibility of a European origin for Native Americans here in the United States? Well, if that's true, that is a big deal, and I have to go check it out.
Okay, one, I'm surprised they actually didn't chop her up to make her say anything stupid. But two, as expected, they're trying to bring the Solutrean hypothesis into this, which is like kind of pseudo-archaeology 101, just like indiscriminately mixed time periods. Windover and the Solutreans they're separated by like, the Windover and the Solutreans are separated from each other by something like 8 to 10,000 years. They have nothing to do with each other. Yeah, honestly, I don't know where they're going with this, but I expect that if you go watch my Solutrean hypothesis video, it's going to explain why the rest of at least most of the rest of this episode is going to be very disingenuous.
I'm investigating America's ancient history. I'm questioning if the earliest people to come to America thousands of years ago may not have been who we thought, or have come from where we've been taught. The established prehistory of our country says migrants known as the Clovis people got here first, by crossing a land bridge from Asia around 15,000 years ago.
That is such a god-awful animation of what that land bridge looked like. Basically, it wasn't this like little tiny sliver isthmus. It was the entire region around Alaska and Siberia that were merged, but that's neither here nor there.
But what if that's all wrong? Some believe ancient travelers may have crossed an ice sheet, arriving in North America even earlier. But
also, this is really minor, but their animation is showing them going across the ice itself. That's not how the Solutrean hypothesis works. The claim of the Solutrean hypothesis is they're taking boats along the margin of the ice, going after, sea mammals, seals, and things like that for the fat resources and the meat and so on. But I digress.
From the other direction entirely. I've met a woman in Florida who believes that immaculately preserved skeletons found in a peat bog could be European, while the bioarchaeologist I just met disagrees. But even if the skeletons aren't European, someone does believe prehistoric European travelers made it to America. And that someone comes from the last place I'd expect, the dusty halls of the Smithsonian.
They're hiding the red-haired giants.
The Smithsonian is known for housing some of the most renowned artifacts. From the Hope Diamond, thought to be the world's largest blue diamond, to the Star-Spangled Banner that inspired the U.S. national anthem, to the hat worn by Abraham Lincoln on the night of his assassination. The Smithsonian houses some of the world's most valuable treasures. But they are not known for challenging the status quo. There are even legends and conspiracy theories suggesting the Smithsonian withholds evidence to suppress the truth. That's why it's shocking to me that my next clue could be hidden behind these doors. Well, Dennis, I'm curious, what do you think about the urban legends about the Smithsonian is hiding artifacts?
Oh, well, the artifacts that we curate and take care of here are properties of the people of, I'd say, the world.
Okay.
And if you make an appointment, we'll show you anything we have.
I'm going to take you up on that.
All right.
And what I'm trying to understand better is the first peopling of Americas. Maybe, in fact, it came from Europe across the ice bridge down into North America.
Well, the evidence that we found supports that idea almost 100%. It looks like Ice Age Europeans did get to North America probably 23,000 years ago.
That's not what I was taught in school.
Me either.
Dr. Stanford's theory is revolutionary. He believes that the Solutreans, a group of ancient people from modern-day France, traveled to America sometime between 14,000 and 25,000 years ago, predating even the Clovis people, who were thought to have been here first around 15,000 years ago. Stanford thinks the Solutreans migrated from the east coast of the United States and shared their distinctive tool-making skills with Clovis people who came from the west.
That's also not what Stanford is saying. The Solutrean hypothesis is effectively saying that the Clovis people are the descendants of the Solutrean people who came over from Europe. Now, the degree to which that descent is cultural or genetic is it can get murky, but the Solutrean people there were no Clovis people before Clovis technology existed, so you can't teach a Clovis person to be Clovis. It's just kind of a really they're not explaining this hypothesis well.
The Clovis people used advanced stone tools, eerily similar to tools found in Solutre, France. Explain to me this migration of the Solutrean people from Europe to North America. How did that happen?
Well, basically, let's look at this map here. You see that these people are all along what's currently the north coast of Spain and southwest France. But during the Ice Age, the coast was clear out here because of the lower sea level.
So you created more land out into what is now the ocean where these people were living, and now it's under 200-300 feet of water.
Well, for instance, right here, there's over 400,000 acres that are now underwater that would have been available for people and animals to utilize. Where do people like to live? You know, when you turn on the satellite view of the world at night, where's most of the lights?
Along the coastline.
Right on the coastlines. Right. And the coast is an easier place to make a living than any place else. What do you really need during a real cold period is fat.
Right.
And seals are the primary thing they're after.
Wait a minute. Now, what you're suggesting is they would have to have boats?
Boats have been around for 50,000 years. When you have a boat, water bodies such as oceans, rivers, lakes, no longer barriers, they're highways.
Sounds good, but it's complete bullshit. Lakes and rivers, yes. When you have boats, those are easily navigable. You cannot make that equivalence between lakes and rivers and the open ocean. That is something else altogether. Even the Phoenicians, who have this incredible reputation as like the great seafarers of the ancient world, they followed coasts. They didn't go out into the open sea. They were staying within sight of land, and by so doing were able to make it all the way around the the Straits of Gibraltar up into northern Europe, so on. So this whole idea that the ocean is not a barrier, especially the North Atlantic is not a barrier once you have boats, is genuinely preposterous and ignorant on Dennis's part. Like I said in the Solutrean video, he was a good archaeologist, R.I.P., but he hung his hat on a hypothesis that has not held up under the weight of later analysis and investigation.
So what you're suggesting is we had a migration or a movement from Europe to North America?
Well, that's what the ultimate outcome is.
So the Solutrean people were living here and then began to migrate, feeding off the seals and making their way west.
They no doubt landed and worked their way south over the years. As a matter of fact, here's a specimen, which is a Solutrean type biface called the laurel leaf.
Okay.
And this one was found at the intersection of the James and Appomattox River in Virginia.
Okay, so I know this biface that he's talking about. If I remember right, it's called the Epps biface. And it was excavated in a 17th century, so 1600s AD, historic, I think it was a homestead, but it was a historic site. It's not from a paleo context. So these things were collected in Europe as, you know, curios and heirlooms and things, just like people today collect arrowheads. It's exactly the kind of light and portable object that someone coming from Europe to America might have brought with them as a keepsake of the old world, that they might have brought to Virginia with them. This isn't the evidence that Stanford is making it out to be, and I'm familiar with this because he's tried to, you know, use this as evidence in support of the Solutrean hypothesis before.
Really?
But guess what? It's made out of flint from France.
Wait a minute. So you're saying this piece here was found in Virginia, what is now Virginia, but the rock itself, this chert, is French chert?
Yes, exactly. So somebody brought this rock or this artifact from Europe to Virginia.
That's the only thing that could have happened.
Absolutely.
And what time did that happen?
Well, the artifact itself dates probably around 20,000 years old. These are all local rocks from Virginia.
This is getting into some pretty controversial territory. You realize that, right?
Totally.
Dennis Stanford's vast collection of artifacts supports the idea of a Solutrean migration to America more than 20,000 years ago. Even though Dr. Rachel Wentz in Windover told me the DNA of the bog people in Florida wasn't European, not everyone agrees. And I think it's important to hear what Dennis thinks. So Dennis, I was recently in Florida and I looked at these bog people I'm sure you've heard about. Could this suggest down in Florida that there were Solutrean and Clovis people from Europe that came down there?
Actually, I think it might, because the DNA that they think these people had comes from Europe.
Okay, Dennis is completely full of shit on this one. He's just wrong. Every genetic specialist that has evaluated the, you know, American X2 versus European X2 clades of the X haplogroup have concluded that these are different things. These are different lineages that have a common ancestor way, way back in prehistory. So like, go read some actual, you know, archaeogeneticists. Eske Willerslev is really good. He's got a lot of awesome like public lectures recorded that are up on YouTube that you can find. I'll link a few of those down below. Deborah Bolanek. Jennifer Raff has a really accessible book called Origin that is about the genetics of North America specifically. I think it covers the Americas in general, if I remember right. I only just kind of skimmed through it because I've read most of the research papers that get into more detail. But the Origin book is it's really accessible to like a non-specialist audience.
And it probably came from Europe around 23,000 years ago.
Dennis's belief that there is a connection between the bog people and ancient Europe contradicts what I heard from the expert at the site. Dennis speculates that even if the 7,000-year-old bog people are not the Solutreans, there's still an important connection.
I think they're definitely the descendants of the Solutreans, without a doubt. We're getting a lot of these Solutrean kind of artifacts in Florida as well, I might add.
Really?
What he's talking about when it comes to like Solutrean type artifacts, I think he's probably talking about Sewanee Simpson points, which are, you know, vaguely lanceolate projectile points, pretty similar to Clovis without the flute. They're not Solutrean. They're just lanceolate bifaces, which are common in the Americas.
Well, what's really interesting is this engraving of a mammoth that's on a fragment of a bone from an extremely large animal. So with this size animal, it would have to be either a mammoth, a mastodon, or a ground sloth.
And doesn't that tell us something about the age right there?
That tells us that it's at least over 11,000 years old, which is when these animals all went extinct. Some people think that this is a mammoth, but I don't, because of the configuration of the back of the animal. So it fits better a mastodon than it does a mammoth.
Mammoth and mastodons are related, but mastodons were slightly smaller with shorter legs, a lower, flatter head, and an average height of 6 to 9 feet, in contrast to the 9 to 12 foot tall mammoth. Fossils for both creatures have been found in North America, having been hunted by man. Well, I have to say, Dennis, you say it's a mastodon. Some people say it's a mammoth. Why does it matter?
Because there are no mastodons in Europe.
I love this argument because it's just so fucking stupid. So both mammoths and mastodons exist in the Americas. This artifact came from the Americas. This thing has no connection to Europe. It is irrelevant to the question of people coming from Europe. The only way that I can see a connection being made here is to try to claim that the art style of the drawing of the proboscidean, like whichever elephant it is, the art style is European, but we're talking about a fucking etching outline of an animal. It's line work. Anyone can do this. Even if this artifact is legit, which I have no reason to believe it's not, it has no bearing on this question whatsoever. It's a very weird bait and switch non sequitur argument that really doesn't make any sense.
So it couldn't have been copied from European cave art is really what that means.
No shit.
Exactly. We've examined this in great detail, and there's absolutely nothing on the specimen itself that says fake.
Who found this?
A gentleman by the name of James Kennedy found it.
Dennis, this is amazing stuff, and it really hits me hard personally because I was taught that the peopling of the Americas came from Asia across the Bering Strait land bridge into the Americas. But your work suggests that the peopling of America, that was part of the story, but in fact the new chapter is coming from what is Europe into what is now the Americas. And this bone here seems to be a key piece of evidence to support this new theory. I mean, this changes the paradigm in a huge way.
It would have if it was legit.
I'm returning to Florida on a mission to discover if prehistoric Europeans were actually the first to make it to America. The established historical record says that Native Americans crossed a land bridge from Asia to North America around 13,000 BC. And while no one's downplaying the incredibly rich Native American culture,
did anyone else notice that they just kind of like had the path go around some mountains in Alaska? You know, makes a certain amount of sense. And then straight through the bigger mountains in Canada and the United States.
what I've learned is that Ice Age explorers from Europe may have also made it here, perhaps even 20,000 years ago. One of the pieces of evidence is a carving found by a man in Florida. It's the oldest piece of art ever found in North America, and it's a critical clue in what amounts to a prehistoric mystery. So you're the guy who found the mammoth carving?
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to understand who the first humans were to North America. Did they come from Asia, like is the prevailing theory, or did they come from Europe? And then I talked to Dennis Stanford, and he's absolutely convinced that the first people that came here were Europeans, the Solutreans from around France. The big piece of evidence that really got him excited was your amazing discovery. So
Yeah.
I want to learn more about that.
Well, I've got one of the replicas.
Yeah, I'm going to fast forward this until they get to something interesting. Okay, they never made another coherent or substantial point after that. They just kind of wandered around looking for mammoth and mastodon teeth and made a bunch of non sequitur arguments. So, like I've said, I already did a whole video about the Solutrean hypothesis with Ancient Americas. So, go give that a look. Link to that's down in the description. Windover really is a very important archaeological site because what we found, archaeologists found at Windover tended towards the perishable fabrics, rope, wood objects, these kinds of things that don't normally preserve in the archaeological record when we're dealing with archaic period time depths, these like 7, 8, 9,000 year time periods. We don't typically find them, but because this was a waterlogged environment, they found quite a bit of it. And what they found was the ratio of perishable objects to non-perishable objects like stone tools, which we find in abundance in archaic contexts, was vastly better represented. The perishable stuff, there was much more of it than there was the non-perishable stuff, which should make sense. But it gives us a really strong lens into what we're missing when we excavate open air archaeological sites from these really early time depths. Obviously, those fabrics were there, they didn't preserve. Those wood tools were there, they just didn't preserve. So Windover is very, very important. But it's not important for the reasons that a lot of people on the internet want to make it be important. I hope everyone understands at this point that anything that you see, especially nowadays on the History Channel, cannot be trusted. Certainly nothing Scott Wolter is pushing can be trusted as, good science. Yeah, the History Channel, they're entertainers. They're not educators. So they're really just fodder for misinformation to proliferate. That's really all I have to say about that. I look forward to reading your comments as always. And as always, thank you for watching, especially those of you who made it this far. See ya.